be able to work in this particular age, don't forget, there's a spirit of awakening after all, as dire as people think things are and as pessimistic as many become. I have never lost sight of my colleagues at Blue Fire Film. We don't lose the insight into that we are living in exactly the right time for the truth to be known about what's been going on, about the architecture of control and also the architects who've designed it. So to me, it's an absolutely thrilling experience, the physical fact of doing it and just the chance to be able to get this work down in a modern medium, So people should just go to Wikipedia or one of the online encyclopedias and put in the word total institution and governmentality, and then think about what they're seeing on TV, think about the control. You just mentioned yourself about how people are policing themselves, how even merely talking or thinking. We're under a strictly Orwellian system of control that is partly enforced by the corridors of power and the so-called establishment, but it's also co-enforced by each of us, by the people around us who forbid us. David Icke has said many times, as the sheepdog, you will not be able to leave the square on which you're standing because the sheepdog is there to knock you back into line. What he meant was the people around us, the consensus trance. So yes, you have to be alert to the bigger, big brother, which is what you're talking about, and the fear of retaliation from them and so forth and so on. But there's also the other concern of just the mindset and the consensus trance of our fellows who would rather sleep the Newtonian sleep and not wake up, not get in touch with what is real about themselves, who will fall for the talismanic words of these leaders, you see, all of these different ways that
they'd
tell
rather
us.
stick their heads in the sand, wouldn't they?
Yes, they do. And, of course, in one way you can understand it because people buy into what's coming down. They buy into New World Order. They buy into Global Village because of the way it's sold. It's sold to us through talismanic words. A nice sheen is put on it. They're constantly pulling the rug to make everybody so very insecure that then we buy into that, and we tend to feel that is the right way to go, So it's also a sort of a marketing down through the years, this constant drip feeding that with these talismanic words that they're using constantly to try and market this thing and sell it to us, and at the same time make our own lives, so riddled with anxiety that we kind of buy into it. But never to forget that man is also his own police force. We're double and triple checked. Even when we're just going to a cinema, you're carded when you even buy a coffee, from places like Starbucks. I mean, we're ticketed. We have bylaws and bylaws and bylaws, and nobody even fights those little laws, which are totally extortionate and completely confiscatory. So we have in-your-face social and statewide, basically forms of colonialization that people need to wake up to and handle that before we can even go further up the fractal and further up the ladder. Of course, my work does go further up the ladder. I'm always wondering about the architects of control at the highest level, and my work is to try and, elucidate and illuminate that for people so they get an understanding of not only how old this architecture of control is, but, some more of its details and its anatomy. But right on the surface level, right in your daily life, the way the media presents certain things, the way people have this consensus trance, the way children are taught in school, the way the medical profession, is running around circumcising children, and all the other injustices that exist with animals, and just so many other things in our own environment, you see. So there's an entire matrix of this, and it's people can get pessimistic about it, or they can actually start rejoicing about some of the incredible developments and progress that is, in fact, being made on these levels. We are in an incredible time, and I never lose sight of that, because I must add that in my personal life, and I know this is very, very much the same thing for you, George, is that I do not see this discovery or this journey as separate from a man's spiritual progress. They're not two separate things.
Well, they're definitely related.
They are definitely related. So I've never lost sight of that. So it's not just something I do, it's just a job. It's very much part of my own spiritual development, my learning curve, my learning process, my awakening to what is going on. And I feel sure from responses from people, that they feel pretty much the same way too. But it doesn't mean that then you negate fear and jump into the lion's mouth or don't have a rational understanding. We must have that also, and must be aware that, didn't somebody say in South Africa, an activist, I think it was Steve Biko, don't take on the cause of the oppressed unless you're willing to meet the oppressor. So, of course, there is a price to pay. But the thing is, I'm willing to pay that, whatever the price is, because there's no price too high for truth and for freedom and for justice. We're dealing with the same content that I've spoken about before in my other work, but we're looking at it in a slightly different way. I mean, the painter Cézanne, painted dozens and dozens of the same mountain in different light. Monet did it with a single tree. He painted the same tree, literally dozens of times, and it was a different tree because the light was different and the complexion was different. And when we're talking about this great mystery of conspiracy and what's been going on in the world, the person who's studying that needs to be like that. They need to have that kind of an eye, where they examine it, they walk around it, they see it from all sides. They don't get fixated on a particular, prejudicial understanding. They keep reviewing it, keep pulling it out again. Look at it under a different light. Look at it under a different perspective. There's many ways to look at this particular, creature, because it's fascinating. And the establishment figures, they hide themselves. Their agenda is not open. It's, I always describe them as tigers in the long grass. And therefore you need to track them. And that often has to be done by night. And you have to get very aware of their weaponry and what kind of, abilities that they have, because they've been studying us, you see. And
what do they want, Michael? What do they want?
Well, first and foremost, they want this identification. When they remember, because you really can't force everyone into control of shackles by gunpoint. It's much better to work on them psychologically so that you have their identification. And the working for the human being, weakening him so he's not tied into his own selfhood, then we lean on the handrails that are provided by these big fatherly figures, and that's what basically they're up to. Because once you have that complicity, and see, as I said in the beginning, man maybe doesn't want freedom. Maybe he's never had it, and maybe, something even worse, maybe he doesn't even really want it. Maybe what he wants is freedom from freedom. Maybe what he wants is sort of like a decorated and furnished incarceration. And the leaders operate on that level. They go, listen, we know you're anxious, we know you got problems, but we're here to hand you technologies and virtual realities and cyber purgatories and all sorts of bells and whistles to make your incarceration, eventful. And the same thing is the way they present this global village. They're always insinuating that man is imperfect, he needs to be fixed, and I've always described these people as sort of that's the psychopath. The psychopath cannot see the hierarchy. He can only see the hierarchy. That's why they use hierarchical models as their symbols, like, for instance, the pyramid. That's because that is the very symbol, the very emblem of the psychopath, who cannot see the wholeness. He cannot see the perfection. He wants to put earrings on the Mona Lisa. He wants to fix what isn't broken. And this is what we're looking at right now in this particular series, as well as the fact of how this identification takes place, and how, because of an age-old trauma, the human race right now is becoming as alien, or in other words, dehumanized, as his creators. He's actually identifying with them to the point that his own humanity is actually, he's tiring of his own humanity. And this is a fascinating study, because it really blends in psychology with psychology, and certainly the conspiracy. And I know for a fact that the DVD we're working on now, the series, is the first ever attempt to join psychology, the principles of psychology, with conspiracy. So it's totally breaking new ground and looking at the conspiratorial, sort of sphere of knowledge in a completely different way than has been done. We're not pointing fingers anymore. You see, we're not saying, hey, what are they doing over there? What are they doing on the other side of the hill? What are they planning for little old us? We're actually looking at, wait a minute, what is it that we are doing? Because we are the many, they are the few. What is it that we are doing to lend ourselves to any kind of tyranny, whatever it is? That this has not been normally done before in this movement of the alternative research movement, and it's time that we started looking at it. We've been doing it, and we've been getting great responses from people, who are starting to get around this paradigm. Obviously, we look around at the people today and we see this vacancy. We totally see this complicity. We see them egging it on. We see them voting it in. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote 3 massive books on the Gulag, and one of the things he emphasized constantly is how hundreds of thousands of prisoners were controlled by, nothing more than a dozen guards, and were even marched to their death, and all other sorts of terrible, terrible injustices were taking place up in, Siberia during the communist period. And he could never understand how people just moved around like sheep taking these orders when they easily could have overpowered the guard.